Hello and welcome to the Hymn Society sectional features for the 2021 conference. We're so glad you all could join us. Today we have a panel of speakers, and they will be led by Father James Brumm, who directs the Reformed Church Center, Theological Writing Center, and the Seminary Archives of New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And James is a longtime member of the Hymn Society. So we would like to welcome him and thank him for offering to present this panel discussion. And now I will turn it over to James so that he can introduce the panel.
Good evening, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you are. Maybe even some of you it's morning. Glad to be here. This is a hymn writers round table. So to make the table sort of round, even in Zoom world, we have a few other folks with me. Carolyn Winfrey Gillette is a part-time parish associate pastor at First Presbyterian Union Church in Owego, New York, which is a small town in the Finger Lakes. She has served churches in New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, been a chaplain at 2 hospitals and several hospices. She has written 400 plus hymns, which can be found in her 2 books and over 20 other books on her website and 12,000 other websites, and in feature stories in magazines at the Christian Century, Sojourners, New Yorker, and others. Newspapers, PBS TV has used them, NPR they've both talked about how her hymns relate to issues of faith and life today. So we are really pleased to be able to have her with us. If it's anything like it is for me, Carolyn, your hymns pop up suddenly and you run into them in places where you never knew they were. It's like children as they've grown up and they just sort of wander around. Gloria Fanchang is a singer-songwriter, an independent recording artist, and a music minister based in Los Angeles, and originally from New Jersey. Yay, New Jersey. Where in New Jersey, Gloria? Where?
In Fort Lee, up north.
Cool. Yep, I know Fort Lee. She's currently finishing a certificate program at Fuller Theological Seminary and was a Loveless Scholar of the Hymn Society in 2019. She has a heart for helping Asian American churches find their voices in worship, and you can listen to her music on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and other online music platforms, and it can be a real treat, so I encourage you to do that. And Adam Tice was born in Pennsylvania, grew up in Alabama, Oregon, and Indiana, and attended Goshen College, which is a Mennonite liberal arts school. He majored in music with an emphasis on composition and completed a minor in Bible and religion in 2002. He began working as a church musician and choir director while he was still in college. He began courses at Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary, in fall of 2003, which led to the writing of his initial hymn text. Yeah, you want to stay out of trouble, you don't go to seminary. In 2004, Adam was named a Loveless Scholar by the Hymn Society and served as a member of the Hymn Society's executive committee from 2007 to 2010. He was an associate pastor at Hyattsville, Maryland Mennonite Church, and now lives with his family in Goshen. He's a text editor for the 2020 Mennonite hymnal Voices Together, and is on staff at GIA as the editor for Congregational Song. And Adam and I have in common the idea that we have 2 middle initials. Officially, mine is L and H, and yours is M and L. Now, I got a second middle initial when I got married because I took my, see?
Yep.
These things that go on.
Great minds.
Yes, I assume great minds of our spouses because it was my spouse's idea. And a good one. So this is actually the 3rd time we've done one of these hymn writers roundtables. This got started a long time ago. I mean, back in the 90s. And I don't remember if John Core and I were sitting over dinner or over beers at a hymn society conference, but it was one of those things. And we were talking about the hymn writers workshops, which are great and wonderful and very helpful, especially for new hymn writers. But there are only so many times that you can go and talk about how many syllables are in a line in meter and how your rhyme schemes are working before it becomes less helpful, especially after you get published a bit. And we said, well, wouldn't it be great if we could have a hymn writers sectional for people who've been published a bit, so that we can talk about those other things that we really have to try to struggle with, like word choices and theology and what other people think our theology means when we write it down and all that stuff. And so we proposed these. I remember the first one was in Greencastle, which may be before everyone else's time here. I don't know who's out in Zoom world.
I think I was
But
at that one in Greencastle.
you were at
Indiana.
Greencastle?
Yeah.
Yep. And then we had another one which I think was about 12 years ago. So I think this may be running a lot along the lines of Michael Hahn doing his accordion shtick at Hymn Society. He said he only does it when we get new directors of the society, because after he does it once, the director is smart enough not to invite him back. And it may be that the directors have been smart enough not to invite me back, but we've changed directors again, so here we are. And tonight, keeping with the theme of the conference, we're talking about how do we write welcome? And how do we make this work? So I'm going to be giving some leading questions to our panelists, and we're going to start talking, and we're going to see where things go. And after we've been going for about 30 more minutes, we will open it up to Q&A. So write in your questions, type them in the Q&A feature on Zoom, which should show up at the bottom of your panel of your screen if you run the cursor over the Zoom part of your screen. And when we get to that place, Courtney will start reading us questions and we'll start answering those. And we will see where the Holy Spirit is taking us as we come up with words and ideas for this. You know, when I wrote this topic out and was proposing this sectional for this time, I have to say my first thought was Brian Wren's hymn, welcome, 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 welcome in the name of Christ. You know, okay, so one way of writing welcome is that you write a one stanza hymn that uses the word welcome 5 times and the word come twice. And maybe folks will get the idea that you're welcoming them. But now that Brian has done that, and it's not available to any of the rest of us, how do we make our writing welcoming, especially to people from outside our faith community? What are your thoughts, gang?
You might need to call on us one at a time. I think we're all too respectful to go first.
Well, be disrespectful. And Adam, you've now spoken, so guess what?
All right. Well, one thought that I've been contemplating, anticipating this panel, is I think a growing awareness and a growing concern in our field that whenever we sing about welcome, we are putting ourselves in the position of the insider welcoming a presumed outsider, which is a tricky one to navigate, because we do want to, our congregations generally want to state that we are welcoming, we want to invite people, we want to call people in who are out. But even that labeling creates a kind of othering, which can be kind of problematic. Alongside of that, you know, I think of how, you know, if I like to sing the words of Jesus, I like to sing the stories of Jesus, but when we sing those, we place the person of Jesus inside of our own voices, right? And so what does it mean for, well, I'll use two of my own lines from two different hymns as an example here, paraphrasing the Beatitudes. If I sing, "Blessed are you, the poor," I'm making the poor something other than this community, right? If I sing, "Blessed are the poor," that can be inclusive of everybody. Now, if we're understanding that as a quotation of Jesus, then maybe "Blessed are you, the poor" can work just as well if we're hearing it in the voice of God. But in congregational singing, it's all our voice at the same time. So that's just my reflection of how complicated this can be.
I think about the fact that I think there was a study done recently, maybe a Pew study, saying that the majority of people in the U.S. don't really have a faith church connection at this point. They don't identify themselves with having a religious affiliation, and a lot of those people may never come inside the doors of the church, but if they do venture in, what is it they find and what is it they hear and they see? And, apart from the word welcome and things like that, what is it they're looking for that they make connections to? And I think about how, I think of the concerns of some young people I know, for example, one of them who was looking for a new church in a community, and she said she was hoping for two things in a church. One of them was that it had decent parking because she doesn't like to parallel park, but the other one that they care about justice and they look beyond themselves. And so I think sometimes part of our welcome is just addressing issues, caring about the things that people care about, and the things that are on their minds and their hearts and what matters to them in the world and what they see going on in the world, that when we're speaking about things that they care about, people see that as a welcome.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if our songs can feel relatable to people or maybe tell stories in a way that can touch them, it would maybe open their hearts to the church. I also think that sometimes it can be, if you're drawing from the scriptures in your writing, it's important to kind of contextualize it. So it's more to not use like the church Christianese language in your writing, but to write in a way that people can understand if they have no church background.
The contemporary English version of the Bible does that. When they wrote that version of the Bible, they intentionally left out the big theological words. They wouldn't talk about sanctification and justification and the atonement, but they used other words. So that it was really on like a third grade level when they wrote it. And I think we can do that in our hymns. We can say deep theological things, but without using some of those code words that people come in and say, well, what in the world are they talking about?
Which is okay, because I think, once you've used sanctification and justification, the rhyme for line 3 is really troublesome. Where we go there is,
go on
is
vacation.
Really on vacation. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a piece. It's certainly a big piece of it. It's the same as just doing worship planning, which, at least 3 of us, if not all of us, have done at least from time to time. I have students who I teach a liturgy course to, and I tell them, yes, the liturgy using the good liturgical words calls what you do at the beginning of worship the votum, sentences, and salutation. And then I tell them, nobody knows what that means outside of people who took a liturgy course. Gathering sentences is a much better thing to call this. And not to, and I tell them, you just don't call things that, even benediction. I think we're to a place in the world where even benediction is a tough thing to present to people and get and get them to buy in, especially if they've not been in the church for a while or maybe ever. And so to be thinking about how we write those words and what we do and what kind of images we use. And that kind of brings me around to the second question very nicely. Are there certain images or words or phrases? I mean, we've already been talking about the technical churchy talk, but are there other images and words and phrases that are probably problematic for people we want to welcome in? And what do you think those are?
Some of the words that we think are some of the best words can also be some of the hardest ones for other people.
Yeah.
Family, for example, our church likes to call itself the family on the corner, which is, a great image in some ways, but it sure depends on what kind of family you come out of.
Yeah.
What your experience is with family is, if you come from a dysfunctional family, that's not going to sound like a really good thing to be showing up at. And I don't think it means we have to throw out the words completely, but we just have to be pretty careful about how we use them.
I think there was an episode of The Big Bang Theory where Sheldon Cooper said he didn't want to go to the Olive Garden. And somebody asked him why. He said, "I don't like that place. They treat you like family."
Yeah.
And, for Sheldon, that's a different kind of joke. But, it is a real issue. Father and mother. I mean, we just don't, you don't always know. Fellowship. And I mean, and then we get into some of the older hymns. I mean, if you've still got, in Joyful, Joyful, if you still got Brother Love binds man to man, that means all sorts of different things to all sorts of different people.
I was looking at some hymns online on YouTube, trying to find something I could share with someone, and found For the Beauty of the Earth, and the version I found said, "For our race so freely given," or something. And I thought, well, that could be uncomfortable or taken the wrong way, or probably not as it was intended, maybe the human race, but it doesn't sound so good in our context and the ways we look at things and understand them.
Much of the way we understand inclusive language, I think, is also very contextual and applies differently to different communities. One that I've been working on learning to pay attention to is the way that that darkness has been conflated historically, both with race and with sin and with suffering and with pain. Such that there was a very easy conflation with, for example, Africa as the dark continent, as a place of evil or suffering, or as a lesser place. And that type of language really has shaped and seeped into much of our hymnody, much of our theological discourse in unnecessary ways. And so, for example, working on the Voices Together hymnal, we were very careful at interrogating instances of the word darkness. Is it a phrase that's metaphorically developed, where there's a clear sunrise context, and or is it darkness as a stand-in for sin, as a stand-in for suffering, in a way that's all too easily conflated with race? Now, I say that this is contextual because I think this is the responsibility for me as a dominant culture white writer to be paying attention to that and to be using language like that more responsibly. I think it has different resonances within the Black community that it's not my responsibility to suggest different approaches there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've been trying to move away from using gendered words like um, daughters and sons, for example, just to honor the LGBT community.
Mhm.
But it's challenging because as a straight person, I'm so used to that kind of language. So opting for words like children or siblings, I have to be very conscious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to be, I used to think that brothers and sisters was one of those really safe places to go. And, no, more and more I've been learning, okay, well, we can't quite go there either. Or can't go there with everybody. And you just never know. You never know for sure who's going to be in your congregation on a Sunday morning in a lot of places. And certainly as hymn writers, we just never know where our hymns are toddling off to
But
be. And
and I think another way to phrase that would be that it's an opportunity for us to
yeah,
explore new language.
yeah,
So it's not as much a limitation in we're
no,
not supposed to use those words anymore,
right,
but we get to find new words. We get to
right,
experiment, and that's kind of our job.
yeah. Oh yeah, and it's a wonderful thing when it works well, and when we get to find those new words. And I wasn't meaning it necessarily as a bad thing, but it's that moment, when you're writing and you say, "Oh, this'll fit," and then you realize, "Except," and it's not really a bad thing, but for about 30 seconds, it's a bad thing, and then we move on to other business, and we find all the opportunities, which are good.
I guess that's part of welcome and hospitality, isn't it? To just always see what we need to be doing, asking ourselves, what do we need to be doing to make people feel comfortable here with us and among us?
Yeah,
Not us and them, but that we can all be together singing the same hymn, the same song, and finding
yeah.
joy in it.
And
Part,
how do we do that?
part of
Um,
the challenge is recognizing that I I think the easiest thing for us to do is to look around our congregation and make sure that everybody there feels welcome,
mhm.
without recognizing that the people who wouldn't feel welcome, guess what? They aren't there. And those are the hardest things to start to
Mhm.
recognize if you don't find ways to build your consciousness. I think of the churches that don't don't think they need a wheelchair ramp because they don't have anybody in a wheelchair,
Uh, yep.
right? Well, guess what?
Well, yeah, I know. I had my very first parish was that kind of a church. Had a huge set of brick stairs at about, an angle like this going up to because it was almost a second floor sanctuary. And I spent 5 years with those folks trying to talk to them about barrier-free access, and there were a few people who just consistently said, "But Pastor, nobody who has trouble climbing stairs comes to worship here."
Soon as a
Yeah,
trustee breaks his ankle, then you're okay.
well, yeah. They were all remarkably healthy while I was there. We never quite cracked that nut. But I probably warmed things up for somebody else who came after. And in fact, one of the people who came after me was Slat's Tool. She was at the church that was my first church, so I think I made things a little easier for her.
Well, there's a chance to remember the use of pronouns. Slats is they them.
Yeah, for them, yes. And that was thank you for reminding me. Um, so but this also brings up the other side of this as we are making others feel more welcome, as we are expanding the welcome. What does all of this mean, do we think, for the people who've been there holding on to their hymnals all their lives? um, singing the songs faithfully and heartily, and they really liked things the way they are, or at least they're used to them because this is what's always happened. And now, we hymn writer people are coming along and introducing new concepts and fiddling around with the words. And how do we deal with the pushback from that?
One of our aspirations for language and voices together was we posed everything as balances, that we want to balance this with that and this concern with that concern.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted to balance formative language that shapes the faith of emerging people within the church, people growing into the church and coming in, with the lived memory and the cherished heart songs of the people who have spent a lifetime there, internalizing these songs. The songs that you want sung on your deathbed, uh, people may not be ready for a revised language version of their heart song from their childhood.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the most welcoming ways to experience a church is to come into a congregation where people are singing songs they love heartily. Right? I find that to be a very welcoming experience, an opportunity to engage, um, and so I think that fiddling with texts requires utmost care, and I don't think our call is to always sing to our own standards. And I think it can become unwelcoming to change something so beloved that it would introduce harm in changing it, um, uh, which is a really tough line to walk. Because there are clearly things you change and there are things you don't change. So we didn't have hard and fast rules on how we approached that in the hymnal. We changed it sometimes, we didn't other times, and um, can't make everybody happy, including
No.
ourselves.
I think that's the key, is using a variety of music. And as a pastor, we pick a variety of songs. We sing traditional hymns, we sing contemporary songs, we sing taizé music sometimes, a variety of things. And we try to remind people that you never get to sing your favorites all the time, because if you're singing all your favorites, that means somebody else is not singing any or very many of theirs. So it's part of loving your neighbor. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of remind people that loving your neighbor means singing other music too. I remember a woman who was saying once, she was standing in the congregation when they were singing a hymn, and she, as they started the hymn, she kind of rolled her eyes and thought, I really hate this one. And she just decided, she would just belt it out. Why not? Just sing it out. And after the service, the woman next to her came up and said, thank you so much. When I heard you singing that hymn with all your heart and soul, it just touched me so much. And I came in here, I was having a horrible day. Everything bad was happening. But when I heard you sing, it restored my faith, basically. And kind of reminded her that we don't just sing for ourselves. We're singing for people around us. We're singing to God, but we're also singing as part of a community faith. And loving your neighbor means trying new songs, and ones maybe that aren't your favorites, but maybe they'll get to be ones you like.
If I can put Gloria on the spot, the piece you posted recently, integrating some traditional Asian instruments alongside of praise and worship band style music, I thought was an intriguing and beautiful example of musicological welcome and musicological border crossing. Could you tell us a little bit about that song in this context?
Sure. Thanks for asking. Yes, I wrote a song recently called God Who Sees Us, and it was it was a response to a shooting that happened back in March when 6 Asian women were killed. So I was writing with Asian Americans in mind, and trying to write a song of lament for that community. And I I experimented with adding an Asian instrument because it's so rare in church music to do that, I think. And I think having that just would signify that, you know, like Asian identity is affirmed. You know, it's, while somebody might like hate people for their cultural background, actually, like God makes all of us in God's image, right? So I think having that that sound would it was my way of like trying to affirm people. So
Thank you. Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think the balancing thing is some of the best way for us to deal with that. By the way, you're getting a shout out, Gloria, in the chat, so you might want to take a look. Um, but you know, I again talk to people when I'm teaching them about liturgy. I try to compare it to, and it's getting harder and harder because people don't do this as much anymore. But family dinners, you know, when you go to you're at dinner with the aunts and the uncles and here and there, and so everybody's brought something, and you all sit, you know, you're all sitting around the table, and especially when if you're one of the little ones growing up with this family dinner stuff, you know, you have to take politeness helpings of certain things. That's at least what we called them growing up. You know, my mother would take a tablespoon of some vegetable or something and put it on my plate and say, "You have to eat this much of this, and who knows, you might like it." And occasionally I liked it, but you know, more often than not, okay, I'm eating this much of this, and this was because, you know, Great Aunt Sue was over there, or Uncle Henry, and you know, that's the person who brought this, and this was their favorite thing, and so we had to make sure we ate it, you know, so they'd feel hurt. And you know, and if you have, you know, family dinners, you don't always get your favorite dish every night at family dinner, but hopefully, you know, over the course of a month, or if it's a weekly dinner, a few months, your favorite will come up in the rotation. And if you go a year without ever seeing your favorite, you might really want to have a talk with your family. But, um, you know, that it should be that kind of a thing, and that there should be that kind of give and take with everybody bringing a little something. And it's an image I've liked to use. I always think back. One Sunday morning back in the '90s, I was at Eastern Avenue CRC in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where Emily Brink was playing as the organist then. And it just happened to be a Sunday. She told me afterwards not to expect that every Sunday was as eclectic as this one. It was a Sunday when they had a string quartet playing Vivaldi for the prelude, and the choir sang Jesus, joy of our desiring, um, and there was a youth group there that led the psalm in a folk rock setting, and they were singing a couple hymns out of Psalter hymnal that were good old Psalter hymnal hymns. And so I'm sitting there and enjoying the fact that it's this eclectic, and I happen to be sitting in front of a couple of, well, get older women. Let's put it this way: women who are of that age where they thought that their hearing was really much better than it actually was anymore. So that when they thought they were whispering to each other, not so much. And so they're not whispering to each other at just enough of a level that I could hear them having this conversation. And it was while the youth were, or right after the youth had led the psalm, and they're all going to sit down again. And you know, one of them saying to the other one, "I really don't like it when we sing psalms like that, and I wish we'd just stick to what's in Psalter hymnal." And you know, and the other one said, "But you know, but look, all the young people, they're here, and they're taking part in worship, and did you notice that when we sang the hymn out of the hymnal, they all opened up their books and they all sang? Maybe if they can sing our stuff, we can try some of their stuff and be a little patient with them. And I just thought, such a great conversation.
That's great.
Yeah. And hopefully our churches are using that spirit. Carolyn?
I was going to say, I write new words to familiar hymn tunes, and I think sometimes the familiar tunes can be a bridge. I know that I love new music too.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said sometimes for using a familiar tune and a new set of words, because some of the people who need the familiar can latch onto the tune. They're comfortable singing it. And even just doing things like putting Trinitarian language, inclusive Trinitarian language, and language about biblical stories can make people feel comfortable. They don't think they're getting something just completely new, but they recognize the story. And I remember writing a hymn about a lot of stories of immigrants in the Bible. And a woman came up to me after a conference and said that hymn changed my view of immigration, because I just went through story after story after story of people who traveled from one land to another, and Jesus fleeing with his parents into Egypt and things, and you put it in the context of the old Bible stories that they've been hearing for years, or traditional religious language in some ways, that can be a bridge, or the tune.
Yeah. They feel like, okay, I understand what we're talking about here. This is a safe place.
Yeah, but then you can go in a different issue, like talk about immigration, talk about racial justice, talk about all kinds of things. But in the context where they see something familiar, they're comfortable with, they can start with.
Yeah, gives them a place to start. Okay, well, I promised that at about half an hour, and we're just there or a little past it. We'd start taking questions if there are questions for us to take. Courtney, what's the good word?
So we have a question, as we use accessible language, is it no longer worthwhile to teach the significance of things like raise my Ebenezer?
I wrote a column about that question a few years ago for the hymn, so I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think seizing on teachable moments can be a matter of welcome as well, that taking an opportunity perhaps to explain what Ebenezer is can be a useful thing. But I also think there's something to be said for recognizing that on occasion, poetic language does not have to be immediately comprehensible. And that's part of the beauty of some of the old classic hymns. For this column, I had looked at 10 different hymnals to see where Come Thou Fount appeared in those hymnals. And in 10 hymnals, it was in 10 different sections, and none of them Pentecost, for which it was written. So my interpretation of that is that nobody really particularly cares what the hymn is about on a comprehensible level, but it's delightful to sing. So I think singing something beautiful, artistically, poetically wonderful, even if it's weird, even if it's not necessarily right at the top of our consciousness, I think can still be a welcoming thing. I wouldn't necessarily write Ebenezer now because it's 2021. But I certainly don't object to using it in an era appropriate way.
I think I might write Ebenezer if I had just the right place, but and this may just be that I've gotten to be old enough that I know that every time I say I would not do something at all, the very next week God says, "Well, guess what you're going to get to do today? Guess what you're going to get to write." I've talked about Ebenezer in the same way, and it's a wonderful teachable moment. And you get people who ask, and I really resonate with that idea. I don't think we want words to all be accessible right off. I remember first learning Earth and All Stars back in the 70s. And singing it, and feeling like, yeah, the first time we sang it, I could just dig right into that. And there we all were. And you could get all those words right away. And then I remember the second time we sang it. I'm thinking, okay. And then I remember the third time I sang it. And even by the third time, you're starting to think, well, okay, but where else can we go? So there is that, there is something to be said for, it's a strange balancing act that we do.
I remember holy, 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 cherubim and seraphim falling down before thee, and the glassy sea and all these kind of images, and they were singing that as a young child, and I had no idea what it was about, but it sure did sound impressive, and it was talking about God, and that was enough. So
Yep. Gloria, any thoughts about this question?
Sorry, could you repeat it? I just got disconnected.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying, we're still talking about the idea of accessible language. And what would you do with something like Here I Raise My Ebenezer? Not too many people raise an Ebenezer every day anymore.
Yeah, I think like Adam said, it's an opportunity to teach the congregation. But that hymn in particular is so known and well loved, so I would continue to sing it too.
And I would say too, there's a difference between something like Ebenezer that perhaps has to be explained and something that might be actively exclusivist in other ways or contrary to our theology. So I think there are lines to be drawn, and they're mushy and wavy, and you never quite know where they are until you step on them.
Yeah, I was going to say you do that, but you wouldn't want to sing. From Greenland's icy mountains and things like that just don't carry over the same way, even though they might be teachable moments. And I remember a story about I've heard about a huge gathering for a women's convocation at Marble Collegiate Church in New York City. It was after Norman Vincent Peale's time, so it was Arthur Caliandro and he was asked, of course, to come and preach and lead worship because he's the pastor there. And what hymn did he choose for them but Rise Up, O Men of God? And the story was told by his organist, who said he never caught the irony.
I wonder with we've got the 4th of July coming up, and people always want to sing one of those hymns. The line, "Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet whose stern, impassioned stress a thoroughfare of freedom beat across the wilderness." And I'm thinking about all we're hearing in the news about indigenous, the boarding schools and everything. And I'm sure there are quite a few people who weren't thinking that was a thoroughfare of freedom being built by pilgrim feet across the wilderness. The language we've just used so long, we just sing it and don't think about it until we have to.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, never mind the part where, no matter what we all learned in elementary school, it turns out, well, the pilgrims were all for freedom for their stuff, but really not too keen on freedom for anybody else's stuff.
Yeah.
We have another question, Courtney?
Yes, so this is kind of a comment with a question. I'm baffled about including music from diverse cultures without it being considered cultural appropriation. I guess as a writer, should stick to my own cultural comfort zone because that's my zone of authenticity. This is maybe more of a matter for whoever selects the service music.
I can address that again from the perspective of having worked on a hymnal recently. In terms of worship leading, I'll address it from that angle, that the alternative is to only honor and only choose and only select and only internalize music from your own culture, which is not reflective of the glory of God and God's reign in the world. And the beauty of song is that song can be, uh, when it's done respectfully, can be shared across cultures without removing it from the originating context. It's not like stealing a piece of artwork. It can be something that is shared across cultural lines. So if the music is responsibly sourced and shared with proper deference and honor given to its originating culture, I think it's a different matter from appropriation. There are certainly ways to do that badly. I think converting a song from another culture into the style and form of our own culture can be sort of reshaping it in our own image, which can be a problem.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of other problems. And as you say, Linda, as a writer, I I don't want to write something that's not authentic to myself either. So that there are boundaries there. But in terms of how we worship, I think it's imperative that we do try to learn from one another and try to receive with grace and gratitude songs from other cultures.
I think it helps if you partner with people from different cultures to help introduce different kinds of songs. So, for example, if you had like a Black worship leader or somebody in your congregation to, explain the meaning behind or the story behind a song in like a gospel tradition, I think that would be more helpful for people to really understand where the song is coming from, um, and to do it in like a respectful way. But I did have a kind of related question to the other hymn writers here, because like if you've tried to write um, in support of like different communities, like for example, I know Adam wrote a weary couple, and I think you were thinking about like the refugees coming into the States at the time. But I don't know like how you know like did you like how did you internalize that story to write it, or like did you partner with anyone in that process?
Um, that one in particular was more about paying attention to the news and just being moved by what I saw. So that was more the origins of that one. A few others, like a text I wrote called "Quirky, Queer, and Wonderful." I was careful to sort of receive word of what was wanted and what was looked for, especially among queer Christian communities. And so yeah, there are times where I have been intentional about partnering. Um, it, I'd be really curious to hear Carolyn's response to this one too, as so much of what you do is oriented in these directions.
I would say, first of all, that sometimes I write as you do, listening to the news, and um, but I try to listen to people from the communities involved. And one of the hymns I wrote um, not too long ago is there is a time for silence, a time to listen well, a time to hear the stories other people have to tell. And because really I'm in a pretty white church, in an area of the country, and um, the people that I, you can't really speak for anybody else, but in a way, the community that I was speaking to there was a community that needs to sit back and listen to other people's stories, and um, not just to jump in and try to solve things and to say, this is, we have all this wisdom and this is what we're supposed to do, but to listen. And that was just where I went with that one. It was just a reminder that that's an important part of our faithfulness too. It doesn't end there. In the end, we listen, we work with the community. In the end, we try to make a difference in whatever humble way we can. But at the same time, it really starts with listening, I think. We can't just assume for other people.
Yeah. I'm currently on weekends serving a congregation that is 2/3 Ghanaian and one third white bread. And so one of the things that I was asked to do when I started working with them a little over a year ago was to, incorporate Ghanaian songs, which meant learning about Ghanaian songs and asking them to, teach me the Ghanaian songs that they love, because I don't always know. And I've been very frustrated by the fact that the only Ghanaian hymnals I can find are text only, which doesn't help me a whole. I mean, I'm now managing to translate Ghanaian texts, but still gives me no idea what the tune is. And but as I've been doing this, we've been trying to, it's a little bit of appropriate, helping them to appropriate and helping them to include, because they'd already been singing Anglo songs. And now we're also trying to, every once in a while we'll sing a song from another culture and sing it so we always sing the Ghanaian songs in Ghanaian, and if possible also in English. But we're trying to now, sing some other things in those languages and as well as in English. And then last Christmas, as we got ready for Christmas, I was asking, okay, tell me about, what you sing for a Gloria. And all the Glorias that they sang were Latin and were usually to Anglo tunes. And I said, but what's your what's a Gloria for you? And they said, no, we don't do that. And I said, you don't tell that story on Christmas Eve? Oh, of course we do that. Well, and so by that time I had learned enough Ghanaian and was able, with some help, to translate just enough. We wrote, and we found a Ghanaian tune that went to a text that nobody really liked too much, but they liked the tune. And we created for them their own Ghanaian Gloria so that it could be theirs. And so, I think there are just all sorts of possibilities. Any other questions, Courtney?
Just a comment. The question of telling other people's stories in support of them and to give them visibility was raised in the participants' general writing group. Some people consider that a heinous theft of opportunity for persons in that community to write their own stories and have them published. It's a mini horn dilemma. Anybody have any thoughts about that?
I think it's an intriguing question. I think finding ways to open space and step back when possible to provide room for people who have been denied that space historically is incredibly important as well.
Yeah.
I never realized text writing was so difficult.
Like everything else, it's one of those places where the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah. That's the last of comments and questions. You want to wrap up with?
Well, I was going to say maybe we could wrap up. I'd like to jump down to what was my last question for everybody. What might be our hopes for how congregational song might evolve into the next generation? when about 30 years from now, Gloria is the one leading this gathering.
I guess one thing that I hope is that even though I love writing new hymn texts and putting them to traditional tunes, I hope that people will still be singing the songs of a couple thousand years of church history and not just toss them out for everything new. There's, we talked about variety in music. Part of that variety is different cultures and things like that, but it's partly over time. And we have a long history of wonderful church music. And I do grieve a little when I come across, for example, a church that's only doing really contemporary stuff. And the kids who are growing up in the Sunday school have no clue of any of the traditional hymns. And I think there should be a blend. Always room for something new, but at the same time, there are some beautiful, beautiful traditional hymns that people should certainly remember and know. We should teach to the children.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? What would you hope for as this all keeps evolving?
Well, I'll go first so that Gloria can have the last word then. I was going to wait till after her, but let's let her have the last sentence here. What I think I see happening at the growing edges of our field is a really exciting genre bending and blending, that people are learning from each other and singing together in new ways and bringing sounds together, like what Gloria did in her song, melding Asian instruments, traditional Asian instruments, into a praise and worship style. I hear that happening with some composers where you don't know whether it's from a band or for piano, and it may be written in a strophic style that have a refrain that keeps coming back. Those are the songs that get me most excited now, and I hope to keep seeing that grow as we listen outside of our own sound pools, as we learn to appreciate the structures and the styles across genres and across cultures.
I guess I'd love to see just a growing diversity of congregational music, and that, the traditional hymns or even contemporary songs of like the Western part of the world wouldn't be the only ones that like everybody knows, but perhaps there will be, a song from, like Asian communities, for example, that everybody also knows and sings. So
the way everybody knows Amazing Grace, everybody will know something else.
Songs from other cultures.
Yes. Okay, I think that's a lovely.
What about you, James? You didn't answer that question.
No, I didn't. One of the advantages of being the panelist is to have to always answer the question. Sometimes I just get to ask them and duck. Yeah, I would really hope that there would be things that are beyond that would be beloved and very, very different from, I mean, not only that there are these fusion things being sung, but that they are now considered to be such a deep, deep part of the canon that of course we have to sing them. And also things that and also some tunes that, I wonder about tunes that don't get sung so much today. And I would hope, to come back in 30 years to find out that because of somebody like Carolyn or somebody like me, that we've stuck something to an old tune that isn't necessarily super familiar, or an old tune that, because it's been associated with a text that's not so useful, gets to have a new life associated to something else, or even a blended thing. I always think of and now I can't, Sui Hong Lim's setting of You Servants of God, which is so different from anything else we have, and to be thinking there are going to be things out there like that, and that some of us will be surprised, and yet they'll be beloved by others. I think that's just a wonderful place to look forward to being. Thanks to all of you for a lovely conversation. This is really great.
Thank you.
I look forward to the next time we can all be in the same place and having conversations.
Thank you.
Thank
See each
you.
other
Thank you
again.
very much.
Take
You
care.
all for participating, and we hope to see you online at some other conference sectionals, or
Yep.
the actual days of the conference for the plenaries and prayer and the evening hymn events. So thank you
Yes.
very much on behalf of the Hymn Society. We appreciate your expertise and giving up your time in this lively discussion.
Thanks. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.